Welcome back to Quiet Badges Stories. Before we begin today, if this one pulls you in, and I think it will, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel now. Let's talk about the man in bed 9 and the woman in the blue scrubs who refused to let him disappear. Nobody at Lakemont Veterans Medical Center wanted to fight for the Marine in bed 9. The neurologists called him unreachable. The case managers called him expensive. The overnight staff called him difficult, not because he caused trouble, but because his eyes moved in ways that unsettled people, and unsettled people generated paperwork that nobody wanted to write. Only one nurse on the early shift kept coming back. She wasn't the loudest voice on the ward. She wasn't even the most experienced, at least not on paper. Audra Finch was 38, lean, quiet. With dark hair she kept in a knot and blue-gray eyes that didn't land on you so much as they passed through you. She wore the same worn navy blue scrubs every shift, the color faded to something closer to denim. She worked long, documented everything, and said very little that wasn't directly related to a patient. Nobody asked about her background. Nobody thought to. Gideon Taft had been in bed 9 for 7 months. He was 41 years old. He had been a gunnery sergeant with the 3rd Marine Regiment before a pressure plate IED ended everything in a single second on a dirt road outside Kandahar. The blast fractured 3 cervical vertebrae, caused a traumatic brain injury severe enough to rattle his skull from the inside, and put him in a coma for 9 days. He came out of the coma but never fully surfaced. The official classification was minimally conscious state, borderline persistent vegetative. To Dr. Gregory Haas, head of Lakemont's Neurological Rehabilitation Division, that classification was the whole story. No purposeful response. Haas said during rounds one Tuesday morning, standing at the foot of bed 9 with 4 residents fanned out behind him like a small disappointed chorus. Motor activity inconsistent. Auditory response negligible. He tapped his tablet without looking up. Continue current protocol. Family counseling should be updated to reflect long-term placement options. Audra stood near the medication cart and said nothing. But she was watching Gideon's right hand. It lay against the bed rail, 3 fingers pressed down, a pause, then 1. 3, pause, 1. She had heard that pattern before, not in a hospital. In a valley in Afghanistan 6 years ago, transmitted through a damaged radio by a crew chief named Callan Birch, who was buying time for a rescue she wasn't sure she could complete. The 160th SOAR didn't have an official knock, but the crews did. Small rhythms passed between people who flew together in the dark, in the noise, in places that didn't show up on the maps they handed you afterward. Things that meant I'm still here. Don't leave me. Audra set down the medication list. She took 2 steps toward bed 9. Haas was still talking. She didn't hear him. She pressed her own fingers against the cold metal rail at Gideon's side and untapped back. 1, pause, 3. The monitor above bed 9 spiked. Heart rate climbed from 54 to 79 in 4 seconds. Gideon's right thumb pressed down against the rail. 1 blink, deliberate. Haas looked up from the tablet. Nurse Finch. She turned. What are you doing? Checking his position, she said. Haas studied her for a moment. Document the cardiac event, likely vagal. He turned back to the residents. Unreliable stimulus response in MCS presentation. Common and clinically meaningless. Audra turned back to Gideon's hand. It was still. It had said what it needed to say. She knew what she had seen. She also knew that knowing something and proving it were 2 entirely different problems in a unit run by a man like Haas. She had been watching for 2 weeks before she said anything formally. Her notes were careful. Date, time, Gideon's position, stimulus, response. She wasn't a neurologist and didn't try to write like one. She wrote like someone who had spent 12 years tracking vital signs in conditions with no ceiling and no floor. In aircraft with no stable reference point, in the dark, in engine noise so loud you felt it in your back teeth. She wrote precisely because precision had been the difference. More than once, between someone making it out and someone not making it out at all. The pattern across 14 days was clear. Gideon's right hand produced rhythmic movements during her shifts specifically. Not during rounds, not during physical therapy, when she was close, when she spoke near the bed. He knew she was there. She brought the documentation to Haas on a Thursday afternoon. He read the first 2 lines and handed it back. Confirmation bias, he said pleasantly. You expect to see response, so you interpret coincidental motor activity as purposeful. It's a common error in nursing observation. He smiled without warmth. I appreciate the diligence. Document it in the nursing notes and move on. Audra didn't move on. She found Dr. Carmen Lowe, the ward's attending hospitalist, in the break room that evening. Lowe was younger than Haas, quick-eyed and chronically overworked. She read the full 2 weeks of notes with her coffee going cold beside her. This is thorough, Lowe said. He responds to me specifically, Audra said. I need someone else to see it. Lo looked up. Haas won't like this. Haas isn't in bed 9. A pause. Lo closed the folder. Set it up. I'll come by during your shift tomorrow morning. The next morning, before rounds, Haas called Audra into his office. It was a small room with a lot of framed credentials. He sat behind his desk the way people sit when they want the desk to do some of the work for them. I've been informed, he said, that you've been seeking second opinions on my patient's prognosis. I've been asking a colleague to observe something I documented. You've been undermining a clinical assessment. His voice stayed perfectly even. This patient's family is in the process of making long-term decisions. Every time a staff member introduces unsupported hope into that situation, I have to spend time I don't have managing the fallout. Audra looked at the credentials on the wall. She counted them without meaning to. Then she said, "What research trial is Commander Taft being considered for?" The room's temperature changed. Haas's expression didn't shift. "I don't know what you're referring to." There was a Blackwell Institute brochure in his chart file, clinical enrollment, candidates, PVS or MCS, military profile preferred. Misfiled paperwork. His name was handwritten in the margin. A beat of silence, the kind that told Audra exactly what she needed to know. "Nurse Finch," Haas said, "you are 30 days from the end of your probationary period in this unit. I would encourage you to think very carefully about how you'd like to use that time." Audra stood up. "I'd like to use it making sure my patient isn't being misclassified to meet enrollment criteria for a private research trial." She left before he could answer. Lo observed Gideon the following morning. She stood 3 feet from the bedrail without speaking. Audra entered from the far side of the room. Gideon's hand moved before she reached him. 3 pause 1. Lo's pen stopped moving on her notepad. Audra tapped the counter signal along the rail. 1 pause 3. Gideon's thumb pressed down. His heart rate climbed. His eyes opened and tracked left toward Audra and held there for 11 full seconds. Lo said quietly, "How long has he been doing that?" 2 weeks documented, probably longer. Lo looked at Gideon. "Commander, can you hear me?" Nothing. His eyes stayed on Audra. "Commander, if you understand me, press your thumb down now." Nothing. "He responds to me," Audra said, "not to everyone." Lo was quiet for a moment. "Why you specifically?" Audra looked at Gideon's face. He was watching her with the focused, depleted attention of a man who had been trying to be heard for a very long time, and had found, finally, one person who was actually listening. "Because he knows me," she said, "from before." The transfer order came on a Friday. Gideon was scheduled to be moved to the Blackwell Institute's residential research facility the following Monday. The paperwork listed Haas as the authorizing physician. Consent had been signed by Gideon's brother, who had been told, in a single meeting 3 months ago, that there was no realistic chance of meaningful recovery. Gideon's wife, Simone Taft, had not been notified. Audra learned that from the charge nurse at 6 in the evening. She spent 10 minutes in the stairwell before she trusted herself to walk back onto the floor, without it showing on her face. Simone lived in Oceanside. She had a 7-year-old son named Ben. She had driven 4 hours each way to visit every other weekend for the first 4 months, until Haas told her that continued visits were psychologically counterproductive given the prognosis, and that she should begin adjusting her life accordingly. She had believed him, because he was the doctor, and he said it plainly, and she was exhausted and frightened and had a child to raise. Audra found Simone's number in the patient contact file and called her from the nurse's station. "Mrs. Taft, my name is Audra Finch. I'm a nurse in the unit where your husband is a patient. I'm calling because I think you should be here before Monday." Simone arrived Saturday morning in a gray coat with Ben beside her, carrying a backpack with a soccer ball keychain on the zipper. She was 38 years old. She had the careful posture of someone who had gotten very good at not letting herself fall apart in public spaces. She stood at the foot of bed 9 and looked at her husband for a long time. Gideon's eyes were closed, his hand rested on the rail. Then Simone said quietly and steadily, "Gideon, I'm here." His hand moved. 3 pause 1. Simone's breath caught. Her hand went to her mouth. Ben looked at his father's fingers. "Dad?" Audra was standing in the doorway. She didn't step inside. This was not her moment, and she knew the shape of it from the outside. The long absence, the thing everyone said was gone, the hand that moved anyway, and she let it be what it was. Simone turned toward the doorway. Her eyes were wet. "He hears us." "Yes," Audra said. "He does." Haas arrived Sunday morning at 7 with a hospital administrator named Jody Pressler, and the transfer authorization countersigned by the medical director, dated Friday. Audra had expected this too. She stood at the nurse's station with 2 weeks of documentation, Lo's written observation report, and a printed copy of the Blackwell brochure with Gideon's name written in the margin in Haas's handwriting. "You cannot transfer him," she said. Haas barely looked at her. "The transfer is fully authorized. His wife revoked proxy consent last night. Her signature supersedes the brother's. The wife's legal standing in decisions of this complexity is equal to any next of kin. She is the spouse. The brother signed because no one called her." Audra placed the folder on the counter. "Someone made sure no one called her." Pressler's eyes moved between them. Haas stepped closer. His voice dropped. "You contacted a patient's family without authorization. You've been recruiting second opinions on a completed clinical assessment. And now you're making accusations against a physician. Do you understand what happens next?" "I understand you need him classified as non-responsive to enroll him in the Blackwell trial," Audra said. "And I understand that evidence of his responsiveness has been documented for 14 days and hasn't made it into his official chart." The hallway went quiet. Pressler looked at Haas. "What documentation?" "Nursing notes," Haas said, "unverified, unreliable." "I verified them." Dr. Lowe stepped out of a doorway 3 rooms down. She had been there for 20 minutes. Her notepad was open. "Dr. Carmen Lowe, attending hospitalist. I observed the patient Saturday morning. He demonstrates purposeful response to specific auditory stimuli. That is not borderline PVS, that is a conscious man." The word landed in the hallway, like something dropped from a height. Pressler's hand went to her phone. Haas said, "Dr. Lowe, you are overreaching a specialty." "Cancel the transfer," Pressler said quietly. She was looking at the brochure on the counter with Gideon's name in the margin. "Dr. Haas, do not go anywhere." She walked away with the phone already at her ear. And then at 9:14 in the morning, the monitor in bed 9 alarmed. Heart rate 41, blood pressure 84/48, oxygen dropping. Someone on the transport prep team had adjusted Gideon's pillow to ready him for the gurney transfer that was now not happening. The angle was wrong. Whatever had been building inside his skull for 7 months was pressing somewhere it could not afford to press. Audra was inside the room in 4 steps. She corrected his neck position with both hands, neutral. The way you learned to do it in a moving aircraft, by feel alone, because there wasn't always light and there wasn't always time and the patient couldn't tell you where it hurt. "Get Dr. Lowe," she said. "Get neurosurgery, get imaging started now." A resident named Torres stared from the doorway. "Now," she said. Torres moved. Haas appeared behind him. "Stand down, Nurse Finch. You have been removed from this patient's care." The monitor read 37. Audra did not stand down. "His neck was hyperextended during pre-transfer prep," she said without turning around. "He has a positional cardiac response, consistent with cervical compression. He needs decompression imaging with strict neutral precautions. If you attempt to stop me from maintaining his neck alignment, I will put that in the operative record by name. You don't have authority to." "Neither do you anymore." Lowe was at the door. "Pressler pulled your authorization 15 minutes ago." She stepped inside. "Audra, talk to me." "ICP event, positional. Chronic compression aggravated by extension. He needs CT or MRI, neutral precautions only. No one tilts him more than 5 degrees. Lowe was already calling for neurology. Gideon's eyes opened. They found Audra's face immediately. She leaned close. "Stay with me," she said. "You hear me. Stay right here with me." His thumb pressed the rail. 1, pause, 3. Answer. The neurosurgeon on call was Dr. Leonard Pelham, a compact, unhurried man who reviewed imaging with the lights dimmed and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked at the scan for 90 seconds before he said anything. "Chronic subdural collection, right temporal," he said. "Slow developing bleed from original TBI. Small enough that standard imaging 7 months ago would have been easy to miss. Large enough over time to suppress awareness." He turned to face the room. "There's also a secondary compression point at the C2-C3 junction. 2 problems working together, both treatable." He looked at Audra. "Who called this?" "Nursing observation," Lowe said. 14 days of documented behavioral response that never made it into his official chart. Pelham studied Audra for a moment. "What's your background?" Audra said Air Force, flight medicine. His expression said he was doing some arithmetic. He didn't ask the rest out loud. He turned back to the scan. "If we relieve the pressure," he said, "we don't know exactly what we get back. Could be significant, could be partial. But what I'm looking at here isn't a man without a functional brain. It's a man with a functional brain being compressed." He said it flatly. "We can prep for decompression today." Haas was standing at the edge of the room. No one was looking at him. They took Gideon to the OR at noon. Simone stood outside pre-op with Ben's hand in hers. She looked at Audra the way people look at the last person they have left to ask. "What does the surgery do exactly?" she said. "Takes the pressure off. Audra said. Gives his brain room to do what it's been trying to do for 7 months. And then? Audra knew better than to promise. She had held enough hands in enough circumstances to understand what promises cost when they didn't land. Then we find out who he's been this whole time, she said. Simone nodded. She pressed her lips together for a moment. He used to tap like that, she said. 3 short, then 1 long. He did it on the kitchen counter when he was thinking. On the steering wheel. It drove me a little crazy. Her voice cracked on the last word. I thought it was just a nervous habit. It was more than that, Audra said. She waited outside the OR for 4 hours and 20 minutes. She wasn't on duty. Nobody asked her to leave. She sat in a plastic chair in the hallway and thought about Callan Birch, which she often did when she was waiting on things she couldn't control. Callan had been a crew chief with the 160th SOAR. He was 26 years old, and he laughed at things that weren't funny because the alternative was worse, and he was one of the best at the work she had ever seen. He died in a valley in the Korengal because of a routing call Audra made from the aircraft. 30 seconds, 1 decision, a ridgeline she'd judged navigable, and the RPG that caught their approach angle had proven her wrong in a way she would not stop hearing. She had rehearsed every version of that decision over 6 years. The version where she was reckless. The version where she was simply unlucky. The version where no route through that valley on that night was survivable. She hadn't found one she could fully live inside. The OR door opened at 4:38 in the afternoon. Pelham came out pulling off his cap. He looked tired the way surgeons look tired when things went the way they were supposed to. Collection drained, he said. Secondary compression at C2-C3 relieved. We had a clean field, he's stable, and his brain activity in recovery is more organized than anything on any scan from the past 7 months. He paused. I don't sell guarantees. But I'll say this. Whatever he has been doing for 7 months, fighting to be seen, fighting to communicate, fighting to stay oriented, that is not the physiology of a man whose brain is gone. That is the physiology of a man who has been working very hard against a problem nobody looked for. Audra pressed her hands flat against her thighs. Thank you, she said. Gideon woke in stages. By the 2nd morning in ICU, he could move his right hand with intention. By the 3rd, he could turn his head. By the 4th, the tube was out and his voice came back in pieces, rough and thin and unmistakably his. Simone was there for all of it. Ben sat in the chair by the window doing homework and periodically walking over to put his hand on his father's arm, and then returning to his homework the way 7-year-olds manage the enormous things, in small pieces between ordinary ones. On the 5th morning, Audra stopped by on her way into her shift. Gideon was awake. He looked different with his eyes fully open and the compression gone. The gray thing lifted from his face, his expression his own again. He tracked her the moment she appeared in the doorway, the way he always had, but now he could turn his whole head to do it. Finch, he said. His voice was slow and careful, but it was certain. She stepped inside. Good morning, Commander. He held her in his eyes for a moment. His right hand moved against the blanket. 3, pause, 1, then he stilled. You answered, he said. I did. First time anyone answered. He swallowed hard. Thought I was losing it. Thought maybe the signal was just. He stopped. Thought maybe none of it was real. It was real, she said. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. You were on Birch's bird, he said, Korengal. The room didn't change. She made sure of it. Yes. He talked about you, Gideon said. After. When we were waiting on secondary evac, he gathered himself. The words came slow, but they came. He knew you'd take the blame for the route. He said it like he was certain. Said, don't let her. Said the secondary crew confirmed later that the alternate approach would have put you over the ridgeline into the 2nd RPG team, not the 1st. He knew the math. He looked at her steadily. He said when you find her, and he said when, not if, you tell her the math was right. He said she'll try to carry it like it wasn't. You tell her it was. The ICU had sounds that didn't stop. Monitors, distant alarms, the soft roll of a cart somewhere down the hallway. Audra was aware of all of them in the way you become aware of ambient sound when the thing you are focused on has gone very still. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs. He was 26, she said. Yes, Gideon said. That doesn't. No, he said, it doesn't, but the math was right, and he wanted you to know. He held her eyes. He said, she'll hear the signal and she'll answer it. That's the whole thing about her. You tell her that's the thing. Audra looked at the window. The morning was coming in flat and gray through the blinds. She had carried a wrong version of that night for 6 years. Not the whole version. A version she'd built alone in the dark, without the part of the story that Callan had left in the valley with Gideon Taft, wrapped up in the certainty that someone would eventually deliver it. She had just needed to be the one who answered. Dr. Gregory Haas was placed on administrative leave pending investigation the same week. The Blackwell Institute brochure and the handwritten notation in Gideon's chart margin led to an audit of his enrollment practices that uncovered 5 other veterans across 2 years whose official assessments didn't match the contemporaneous nursing notes filed by the people who spent the most time with them. 2 of those patients had already been transferred to Blackwell. 1 had died during a trial procedure 7 months earlier, before any of this came to the surface. The medical board opened a formal inquiry. VA regional oversight followed 4 days later. Haas's attorney released a statement. The Blackwell Institute announced an internal review. Nobody on the ward claimed to be surprised. That was always the part that was hardest to sit with, not what Haas had done, but how long the room had let him do it. Gideon Taft walked out of Lakemont Veterans Medical Center 11 weeks after surgery. He used a cane on the left side. He walked slowly and with concentration. Ben walked beside him, talking continuously about whether the hospital cafeteria downstairs had good hot chocolate. Because Ben was 7 and 7-year-olds filled difficult silences with the things that actually mattered to them. Simone walked on the other side, close enough to catch him without being close enough to suggest he needed catching. At the lobby exit, Gideon stopped. He turned back toward the elevator. Through the lobby windows, the second floor was visible. The neurology ward running its ordinary weekday morning. Nurses at the station, a resident doing rounds. The ordinary machinery of the place keeping its ordinary time. Gideon found Audra at the nurse's station window without much searching. She was standing with a chart open, her back half turned. She was watching. He raised his right hand. 3, pause, 1. She pressed 2 fingers against the glass. 1, pause, 3. Ben tugged his father toward the door. Simone smiled without looking up. Gideon turned and walked out into the morning with his family. Lakemont established the Taft Protocol 6 months later. A mandatory secondary assessment for any veteran patient classified as minimally conscious or persistent vegetative, conducted by a clinician unaffiliated with the primary neurological team, requiring behavioral observation across multiple shifts before any prognosis of non-recovery could be made final. The framework was Audra's. She had written it in longhand during her lunch breaks over 3 weeks because she worked 12-hour shifts, and her days didn't leave much extra room. She didn't attend the announcement ceremony. She was on the floor. She was sitting at the bedside of a man in room 4, a former Army Ranger 53, who had stopped speaking after a stroke 6 days ago, and whom the overnight team had already begun describing in their notes as unresponsive. Audra had noticed, on the previous shift, that his left hand moved toward the sound of her voice when she stood near the head of the bed. She pulled her chair close and opened her notepad. She wrote the date, she wrote the time. She wrote exactly what she had seen and when she had seen it and what she had done in response. Then she leaned close to the man in room 4 and said quietly and without any particular urgency, "I'm here, take your time, I'm not going anywhere." His fingers moved. She wrote that down too.